Well, we got some fun stuff in store today, and I am super excited to have one of my good friends and one of our valued partners, Josh Weiss, with us here today. Josh, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm great. Good morning. It is so much fun. I don't know, Juan, if we've ever done a webinar together in all the years.
You know what? I don't know that we've done on stage stuff. We've done a lot of live stuff over the years, talking about the future of MSPs and a number of different things, but I don't know that we've ever done a webinar. So you might be right there.
We haven't. Well, hey, here we are.
Well, I'm super excited. So for those of you that are joining with us today, welcome. For all of you that are going to be with us, we would love to hear where you're from. So post your information in the chat. We're going to be also using the chat as a function. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. This is a partner session. We're going to be talking about partner opportunities, and we're going to be talking about the success of selling cybersecurity. And we're going to be hearing about Josh and his story on how he's been really successful, activating the HacWare products and really being able to go to market with those in a meaningful way. But the whole point of this was to help our partners also learn from each other. So as we build community, it's really important that we have open conversation. And if you know me for any period of time, it's all about sharing best practices and really wondering, helping each other learn together. And so, Josh, I want to say thank you for joining us, man. This is freaking awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's really fun to talk about cybersecurity and tell stories. That was what I wrote on LinkedIn when I was talking about this session, right? It's really the best way to sell. It's the best way to help our customers. It's really the best way to engage the topic of cybersecurity is with stories. So let's tell some.
Yeah, I loved how you said we're going to be spinning some yarn, and I love that analogy. I was thinking about it. I was like, at first I thought about knitting, and then I was like, no, it's not that. But I love what you said. But first and foremost, for those that are joining us with us today, Josh, I don't know how many of our partners know you or those that are here with us today, but why don't you do me a favor and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Josh Weiss. I started and ran and eventually sold an MSP called LA Creative Technologies. Ran that company for about a decade while I was also a music event producer and DJ and very involved in the creative music scene here in Los Angeles. Um, Last year, I sold my MSP to a company called Logic Technology Consulting Group, where I'm now the director of operations. And in that role, most of what I'm doing is being responsible for automation and being responsible for cybersecurity. And specifically, one of the hats that I wear is security awareness training, both for our clients and also internally. Every staff meeting we have, I'm helping to sort of like bring light to cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness for our team. So, there's a lot of hats there, but that in that last one, it comes very deep into sort of where HacWare works.
Yeah.
So over the years, it's been sort of business leader, automation leader, member of the creative community, event producer, security trainer, and was very involved in the MSP event community for a while. I was very deep in the Continuum and ConnectWise world for a while, back when Continuum was still a name. Remember that?
I remember very well.
And yeah, now just like really focused on this new adventure of getting things buttoned up at this new company.
Well, and I will say first and foremost, congratulations on the sale of your company. I know that all of us at some point are looking for what this life this nest life looks like, and I know that that's a really honoring moment to know you've created something, and then to be able to become some part of something so much bigger, and to still be there is a testament to your accomplishments, and I look forward to your success. But
Thank you.
one of the things, Josh, it's interesting that you say is you always had an interesting take on positioning you're with your customers in regards to your products and services. We've talked a multitude over the years, and I think one of the big things is that I liked when you also would identify your target customer type. I remember when we were first talking, and that was one of the big things that you were doing that I thought was really special. Can you talk to me a little bit about like what your ideal client or your ideal customer type was and is?
Of course. Yeah, so I mean, that was actually one of the reasons that my firm came together so well with Logic as well. But I mean, as I came up and as my company got off the ground, I mentioned I was part of the creative community. And so really everyone that I worked for was either an architect or a creative nonprofit, including a number of nonprofits directly related in that music world that I was a part of. So it was very much an extension of where I was in the world, like sort of as a human and as a member of my community in LA. And it was interesting because I didn't think it was possible to start a business from that. And as just like by being a consistent member, by like producing events month after month after month and getting to know people, it was amazing to see how that actually branched into finding clients in these industries. And what was interesting is that, let's say you're in doctors or lawyers or accountants, or you work for banks, right? You're going to have FINRA regulations, you're going to have HIPAA regulations, you're going to have very specific regulations. And so, I mean, certainly if this was 8 years ago, probably the only people worrying about cybersecurity awareness were people who had to check a box on a HIPAA form or something like that. But my goal was always to educate our clients and say, look, you need security just by virtue of being a business in 2017 or 18 or 19 or whatever it was. And so we were trying to bring the awareness of it having at least a basic security stack to clients who did not have it mandated by the government specifically. Obviously, in 2023, it's a little easier because cyber insurance is asking all these questions and we're watching this scale. But for me, my target client type were people who were not traditional sort of buttoned up doctors and lawyer types. And as we brought cybersecurity to them, it was a very different type of education because they're in such different worlds and they may think, hey, I'm not protecting patient records or, whatever it may be. But, I'm sure, I think part of telling stories later in this session should be about some of the risks and the attacks that we do see against these organizations. But
no, I like that. And it's interesting, as you mentioned, like those regulated industries, I like to say that they have pressure to make decisions, right? Because if they have cybersecurity compliance requirements, government mandated, they're forced to do something, right? And I like where you're going with it. I'm really curious to unpack that a little bit and understand a little bit more. So when you say that you were going after customers that don't have these things, like what are some of the conversations look like for a customer like that? But one of the other things I'm curious about is when you were positioning, and I think one of the other genius things that you did was also create like a stack of minimum viable requirements for each of your customers in that space. And you had stitched in really some secret sauce of why. And maybe we could share a little bit about that.
yeah, I mean, I'll say a few things. I mean, first off, I want to close the loop on one thing. I mentioned that the clients I worked with was a very good match with Logic, where I work now. So Logic worked with construction and nonprofits and labor unions. And then so I stitched in with architects and creative nonprofits. And it was really interesting for anyone thinking about selling their business. One of the major wins you can find is someone who gets your niche, especially if you have a pretty weird niche like I did. So the conversations that I was having flowed very well into our company now, which is much larger than mine was. And so that's really interesting. But the conversations looked like sort of helping people understand the risk profile, even of someone who was in a creative industry. And I mean, I'll give an example, because basically the thing you always have to do is tell stories. And I think a lot of people are like, where can I find a story? How can I tell a story that an executive is going to understand? And once you start reading, right? I mean, obviously, like last summer was a good example. You had Colonial Pipeline, right? You can show someone, hey, here's the Wall Street Journal. Here's what it looks like when ransomware hits a gas pipeline and all the gas stations are shut down on the East Coast. That's like a really, I mean, it's almost boring and tactical in how easy it is to talk about, right? But it's amazing. And once you start looking at data breaches, and it's one thing to talk to people about, oh, data breach hits Uber, data breach hits Slack, data breach hits GitHub. That's hard to understand. But when you start to like bring in the stories of identity theft and how that impacts people. So, I mean, we had a nonprofit we worked for there were 6 people. I mean, this is like, nothing, right? They're a foundation. And I had this really interesting experience, and I brought this up a lot in later engagements. They were a foundation that was detaching from a charter school. So you had like 1,000-person organization that they were part of. They were detaching their fundraising arm into a separate foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And I told them, because their IT understood when they were helping to select us, we're going to do some training. And, this is something I want to come back to, is one of the ways we onboard customers is I lead a live security awareness training for those customers. And then we onboard them into security awareness training with HacWare in an automated fashion. But I think it's really important to engage people in a human way as well. We led a training. There was a video I used to use back then in my training from Kevin Roos. He goes to the HackerCon in Vegas, and he shows what social engineering looks like, and specifically how people are doing hacking. It's a great video to help your customers understand security, because you see, he's very normal guy. Kevin Roos is a New York Times reporter who writes about technology.
Right.
And he goes and, they social engineer him and break into his cell phone account. And then this guy gives him some 0-day malware that's recording him on his laptop camera. So I go in, I do this hour-long training just at the boardroom with this really small, sort of cool group of people. And a week later, I get a phone call from one of their employees who said, "Josh, I only know what happened to me because of your training." So totally unrelated to our work, his personal cell phone, someone stole his someone stole his phone number. Someone hijacked his phone number, and someone identity thefted him horrible. Got his bank accounts, got everything. So we didn't prevent it. It's not our job to prevent this on their personal. But him telling me, he's like, "You saved me a good day," because I knew what happened immediately. I knew someone had called the cell phone company and taken my phone number. It was just one of those little things to me, that him having that awareness. And so I started telling that story to people. This really happens, right? This really happens to a normal guy, not some super crazy high power executive, just a guy who works at a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
And it hit him for 2 years. But I really appreciated the fact that bringing him that awareness actually saved him some hours and saved him some real money, because that was an urgent thing for him. So that's part of our onboarding process, right? We don't go to them and say, "Oh, you're 5 people. You don't need anything. We'll just give you some RMM and walk away." We want them to say, "Oh, you understand security," right? Because it's in 2021 or 2 or 3 or, wherever I was telling these stories, there is no IT without security.
Yeah. You're mentioning something. Do you feel the fact that having that conversation opened more doors, or do you feel like it was more of an uphill battle? Give me your take on that. Do you see it being more of an opportunity having that conversation early on, or do you feel like you're pushing them into something?
I think it's more of an opportunity, and I think it's also a self-selection mechanism. I mean, if having that conversation turns you off, if you're someone who's like, "Oh, we don't do that stuff," we don't want to work for you anyway, right? But I want to go in and, certainly we have some legacy customers who aren't on the full stack. But when we go into a new customer, you're going to have, we use Avanan to do email filtering. We use Keeper as a password manager. We use HacWare as an SAT tool. We're not necessarily believers in, "Oh, you also need a SOC, and you also need this, and you also need Blackpoint, and you need,
Right.
you need Threat Locker." But at the least, your cloud is going to be protected.
Right.
We're going to have Huntress on your computers. We have a basic stack that, from a partner perspective, it's not that expensive to maintain a stack like this. You need to have these things in place, right? I mean, we're working on onboarding a pretty well-established, pretty decent-sized labor union right now. We're just doing their servers right now while we ramp up to help desk over the next couple months.
Mm-hmm.
And, their primary executive failed a pretty basic HacWare test yesterday.
Mm.
And that's a story, right? Like, we can't understand how the organization functions if we don't have that level of like, okay, even your executives need to understand this, because they get all pissed. Why are you sending these stupid emails? We don't want to get all these emails. What are these emails? Right? And then you're like, your executive failed one.
It's a pretty big deal. I mean, now let me ask you a question. If they're failing it, like, how do you present that to them? I mean, I know that's a very delicate situation. We've all been there where, this is the guy that or gal that's writing checks to us every month or signing off on them, and you have to come in and tell them, there's a weird moment there. Like,
I like to say one of your users or you inadvertently interacted with one of our tests.
Yeah.
I try to avoid the word fail, right? This is really important. We do this because people are really doing this stuff. Now, one thing, like with this organization, I did not have the benefit of going in this particular way, but this is one of the reasons I really like to do a live security awareness training at onboarding.
I love that.
You're right, because then it's like, oh, this is that thing they were talking about.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, they showed us all this stuff. They talked about it. They cracked jokes about it. Like, we both saw how, personally devastating and sort of organizationally, nationally, internationally devastating this type of attack can be. But also, like, they talked about it, right? We engaged about it. We as a team, there was an effort to understand this better.
And I think that, it's interesting you mentioned that because obviously, being a technology solution provider and being on that side of the house for so long, I recognize a similar thing. You win and lose at onboarding, right? And I think that when you position the products and services at that point, you're making such a much larger impact. They're already in learn mode there. So like to get them out of learn mode and into work mode and then try to bring them back into learn mode later to teach them something. I think that what you're doing there, what you're doing in that onboarding component is super effective, because they're like, okay, I'm going to learn something today. And then they're actually willing to receive the education early on, which I think we starting to see ourselves as managed service providers are starting to see that it is now a new role called educator. Is that similar to what you're doing? Is that kind of been some of the things that have worked well for you? Is that education?
Well, it's amazing. I mean, really, the focus for me has been probably since 2019, good sort of 3 to 4 years now. It's specifically been around the security awareness. And so like coming in at onboarding, doing that, most MSPs are going to do it basic. Here's how our help desk works. Maybe they'll do it live. Maybe they'll just send an email, right? But it's just going to be like, okay, now you can call someone to fix your printer problems. Now you can, whatever it is.
Right.
And just remember, because your previous MSP charged by the hour, we don't charge by the hour. Like, there's the basic presentation we've all been giving since 2012, right?
Yeah.
And so to come in and do a security awareness training, and, one thing I'll say too, and this, this really speaks to education. I don't just do this to talk about the business. I always do my presentations to say, look, certainly your boss, your company owner, your HR manager wants this training to protect the money and the data and the assets and the customers of your organization. But this applies to you. This applies to you. This applies to your spouse. This applies to your children. This applies to your parents. Like, I have a slide in my security presentation. It's a picture of my stepdad at a barbecue. He's 82, right? And he got scammed by someone pretending to be his grandkids.
Yeah.
And he lost $5,000. And my mom was like with him in the house and said, hang up, that's a scam. She had to go to work. She went to work, and then he engaged with these people, 2 different phone calls, 2 different transfers.
Wow.
And I have it in there because it's not just about work.
Right.
I mean, my grandma did a gift card scam 2 weeks ago. Someone phished my grandma, and my aunt bought gift cards.
Sorry to hear that.
And it's like, she has a good sense of humor. She's 92, but It's like, I like these stories because people are like, oh, this matters.
Yeah.
And then they listen.
And I think where you're going with that, I think that, obviously that's the question, right? And it's what the customers are asking for without asking for it. It's that we live in a world that we don't actually fully understand, which is this online world, right? So, I know that there was, Diana Mooring posted, do you feel like stories teach people better as well? I know it works to raise awareness, but can people learn how not to let it happen to them through stories? I think you answered that. And I think that to that point, I use my dad all the time in stories about how he buys stuff on, weird websites in the middle of the night because, he can't sleep. And then he gets his card compromised like the third or fourth, fifth or sixth time. And he asked me the other day, he said, so are you actually profiting from my stories? Can I get an actual kickback from those stories? And I was like, no, that's not. But I do tell your story all the time, right? And it's just, I think that those stories are about the humanistic aspect. We are living in this world outside of work. And to your point, what's happening to your children? Like, are we taking this knowledge and educating? There's this huge gap of people that don't really know how to use this tool called the internet. And then you have this younger generation that hasn't gotten that tribal knowledge of what to do. So they're just bumping around. So I love where you're going with it. I 100% agree with telling real life stories. I definitely would love to see the picture of your stepdad at the barbecue, though. I feel like I'm missing out, though.
Yeah. Well, I'll get it over to you. And to Diana's point, I mean, the stories is how you start the presentation, right? The stories is how you get people's attention.
Right.
If I were to do a presentation where I said, hi, I'm Josh, and here's how to avoid phishing, people are going to be checked out. Right. But if we can start a presentation with humor, with warmth, with sort of engagement, and we can then sort of get into it from that level, then they're like, oh, this matters.
Right.
This is the impact, right? This is what it would look like. So, I mean, in my decks, another story I have is from a client that didn't have two-factor yet, and their main marketing manager clicked a phishing link, and then he emailed 5,000 of his contacts with the phishing link, right? No one lost any money, nothing happened, but like, what a hassle, right? Who wants that?
Yeah, no.
So, you go from the Wall Street Journal headline Colonial Pipeline down to this guy sending a phishing email, down to my stepdad getting scammed. Like it's so sort of varied. And, we're talking anywhere from billions to thousands. But then in one of my slides is that like something like in 2021, something like 90 million Americans lost an average of $1,000 to small scale fraud that year. So, I mean, we're talking what, like a third of adults or something, half of adults in the United States.
Right.
Like, these small little things. But
yeah, we are all part of either the solution or part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
I love that.
Then we can go in and start saying, well, look, here's what a phishing message looks like. Here's how to avoid this stuff. Because now you care, right? Not necessarily that your company is going to go out of business, but who wants to lose $1,000?
I don't.
And I mean, when you see that, like, a third of Americans couldn't buy groceries if they missed one paycheck, you're like, this is a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's a tough time, man, especially for these small situations that could become big ones. I'm curious, obviously this is a good way to position it, and I'm also on the other flip side of that coin. I want to ask, is this something that your customers are asking for? Do you find that they're asking for this type of education, or are you just presenting them with it and then they recognize that they needed it?
Mostly we just say, this is what we do, and then they really appreciate it. What I'm seeing from some people now, like some of our larger labor union clients, their HR department might say, hey, we think we need a security awareness training. Can you help us do this sort of as part of a compliance effort that we have internally?
Right.
But they have to be a pretty mature organization to understand that they need this. Sometimes they're only asking for it because we show them their results from HacWare. And we say, guys, like, this is really bad. Like, you can't have your organization failing in this way.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's got to be someone that has a pretty mature HR department. Otherwise, we have to bring it in.
And it's interesting that you say that, and I'm curious, because oftentimes, people are running their businesses, small and medium businesses, they're focused on their business. They don't know the questions to ask, right? And so when you're positioning this to them, obviously, maybe some of them might think of things in a certain way, in a certain light, but as far as like once they do it and you position the value of it, what's the response that you generally get back? Do they appreciate it? Do they feel like they are willing to make a change more effectively? Or
People really appreciate it. People really appreciate it. I mean, I remember there was a client that we onboarded and we did one of these trainings, and they said right after the training, they said, "We're so glad now we know we picked the right MSP."
That's the best compliment.
Because you brought that in, because that was so unexpected. Now, I mean, a bit of a curveball on this, but for the first time filling out a cybersecurity insurance application a couple of weeks ago, we saw one where they not only asked, were we doing cybersecurity awareness education? Were we doing phish testing?
Right.
But they said, what was the fail rate?
Ooh, it's coming.
That was the first time I saw that. That's wild. Yeah. So, I mean, that speaks, to having some platforms such as HacWare in your stack. You need to use it and understand it, because those questions are coming. I mean, it's such a good question to ask, right? Not just, are you doing it, but how are people doing?
No, and I totally get it. I'm with you on that. I think that many companies are looking at, these new questions. I was giving a talk recently ago, and I remember, a lot of them were saying, how many times have you been handed a NIST framework and saying, do you guys comply with this? Can you fill this out? And they're like, no. Right. So we got a question here. It says, Diana's got some wonderful questions today. Do you feel like cyber is exceedingly hard to sell to companies that don't have the requirements of regulatory and compliance?
It's hard to sell if you sort of frame it as a sell. So, I mean, there's so many ways to sell MSP services and to sell cybersecurity services specifically. Right. Now, what is hard is if you have an entire group of legacy clients who never had security and you're going in trying to sell them security. Mm-hmm. That's going to be hard. I mean, I think, and there's two ways to approach that one. One of them is, this is our requirements in this age, take them or leave them, right? You can do it in an aggressive way. You can do it with a tool like Galactic Scan, where you come in and really educate with stories. We ran, we sent you, for anyone who doesn't know Galactic, you get a link. You send the users a link. You have the executives and the accountant team click on this link, and it goes in without admin creds and shows the users, hey, here's how it'll rip all the passwords out of Chrome and Firefox and Edge. It will, it shows the vulnerabilities on these computers, and it shows the client, here's what happens if your users click a link, even if you think you're protected. And pretty much if you don't run Threat Locker, it's going to run without being stopped. So yes, there's that sort of way to do it. But going into a new client, even then, there's two ways to approach it, which is, here's our base MSP plan and here's our cybersecurity add-on. And I think if you're in a very aggressive sales practice and you're, working 10 or 20 leads a month and you need a really solid, repeatable sales process, do it that way. But you could also be in the position my new company's in, where we only want to bring in the right companies. We have more leads than we know what to do with. And the way to sell them cybersecurity is, this is our package.
Yeah.
Everything's included, and unless you're like a compliance, right? We would have an add-on if you needed compliance, though really we wouldn't even take you because we don't want the hassle. But outside of that, you're going to get an MSP price. You're going to get a package, and it's going to be all you can eat MSP for the, outside of projects. It's going to be HacWare. It's going to be Keeper Password Manager. It's going to be Avanon for your emails. It's going to be Backupify for your backing up your cloud. You're going to have ImiBot to handle your automation. You're going to have Huntress, sort of Huntress Managed Defender on your computer. And you're not going to nickel and dime me by saving $30 a month or 50, $80 a month per user and removing all that, right? So the story is there is no IT without security in 2023.
Yeah.
And not a single deal we've closed since I joined Logic have they even asked.
And I think that that's what companies are looking for, to really iterate around that is, they're looking to us as a trusted advisor, that we have to take that seat. And this is really why my background is what it's always been, is taking the seat at that table, right? And having that strategic conversation around business best practice. Like, I'm not in business to go out of business, right? I'm in business to be part of a partnership in your business to move things forward, right? So I love where you're going with that. I really do feel like if you don't make it an option, if you make it part of the success of their business, then I think 100% the conversation changes. It's when you put too many, things in front of them, I think that they can say, well, I'm going to make the cheapest choice. And that's how we got here. Is security's not cheap and I don't really know that I want it. So do I have to have it? And you're like, well, no, maybe not. And it's like, if you just put it together, it's like, I don't have anything else. All I have is the one thing. And that one thing is what you need.
I mean, it's just too hard, right? Like if I'm supporting you on the cheap plan and you don't have, let's say you don't have something protecting your emails. Like, I mean, like we swear by Avanan, like we use Proofpoint and Avanan both.
Yeah.
Proofpoint is such a legacy solution.
Right.
You have a tool like Avanan that's like an AI email filter that's literally looking for business email compromise. It's looking for the text patterns of a gift card scam or of a whatever it is. Like, it's not just saying this is a bad IP or this is a bad sender. It's looking for the communication or like a spearfish. And if I don't have that, and then you get phished and then I have to deal with it, how much money did I just lose? True. Not only do I look bad because aren't you protecting me? And sure, you signed this waiver, sir. Well, I don't care.
Okay. Not everybody knows that the boss signed the waiver, right? Yeah. A lot of everyone else in the organization are all influencers of you being a managed service provider. So, the receptionist doesn't know they signed a waiver. They clicked it. They didn't know. So,
we had a company recently it was funny. It wasn't a security problem. We thought it was a hostile takeover of the accountant's laptop. It turned out her trackpad went bad.
Oh, nice. It was just.
But this company had signed a waiver. And it was funny because like we liked them. We went in, we solved the problem. It turned out it wasn't even a problem, but it cost us a day of really stressful day. And the accountant, they had said no to a password manager. The accountant had an Excel spreadsheet of passwords on her desktop.
Oh, good.
By the way, this is another awareness thing. Are you all training your techs? If they see an employee with a spreadsheet full of passwords, do your techs know to take action on that? Right? Because you can look at what Galactic is doing. You could look at what Weiss is doing with Empath Cyber. But you need to be or like what I'm doing every staff meeting we have, I speak for like 20, 30 minutes on this topic. Are you making your team aware of cybersecurity awareness, right? Do they know how to talk to your clients about HacWare? Do they know how to identify bad practices from the users? Like, does your team know if they're in IT Glue and they're logging into a legacy client's admin portal for Google, G Suite, and there's no MFA on it, are they going to take action and set that up? Like, we have to be teaching our people, right? This isn't just sending fish tests to our clients.
Right.
Our team needs to be the front end of security for real.
I love that. I love your internal cyber hygiene program. I think that that's a good place to be when you actually know. I always say, for MSPs that are thinking about becoming an MSSP or starting to offer cybersecurity services, see if you can pass the assessment first before you start moving on to showing it to your customers, right? That's a really big thing. And that's a great story to tell. When you're talking to a customer, look at, we passed our own internal cybersecurity. Here's our processes for cybersecurity. Here's how we deal with it. And we've taken that best practice and now we are giving that to our customers. Like, you prove what you say by doing it yourself. And I love what you're doing, is that's 100%. That ongoing, constant end user education is the mechanics that require us to keep moving forward. So I love that, Josh. I love that a lot, man. There was even a heart that flew across the screen there. So I got a question for you. What's your, give us an example of a good conversation that you're having with your customers, other than the stories. You're already, we know your packaging and pricing is on par. What are you doing? What's a good conversation you're having with your customer? Maybe one that doesn't have any security or compliance requirements.
Well, I mean, I think an interesting one, I kind of just alluded to this, but we have this client, they're probably a 25-person architecture firm. Mm-hmm. Architects are interesting because they have these crazy plans for, often they're sort of touching, I mean, anyone who can afford to grow to 25, 30, 50 people as an architecture firm, you've often got some sensitive plans in your collection, even if you don't have any compliance, right? But you don't see that. I mean, imagine if someone has plans, right? If I'm trying to make trouble, if I have plans for a building, I've probably got what I need to make trouble. So I mean, for them, the conversation there is interesting. They work for a pretty sensitive government agency. I have a feeling they're bound by CMMC as the sub on these projects and don't know it. If they brought us CMMC, I'd actually have to refer them to someone else. I don't want it, but I do want them to have good cybersecurity hygiene, at the least, right? I haven't read their contracts. They don't want to share their contracts because they don't want to spend money. So whatever. But point being, the conversation there is, this thing happened. They thought someone took over their accountant's computer. We treated it like an incident, even though it turned out it wasn't an incident. But the conversation with them right now is, they said, okay, cool. Can you guys come and can you start doing regular phishing tests for us? And can you come in, like I did a live training for them back in 2018. Mm-hmm. And they were like, can you come in and do a training? And I said, great, here's a presentation for a new package for you. So the story there, I mean, it wasn't a story. With them, it was like, how do you engage, show them you care by taking care of the incident, saying, even though you signed a waiver saying we'd bill you for this, we're not going to bill you for this. But you actually asked us for something which you've said no to a number of times.
Right.
And so if you want it, this is what it looks like, right? I mean, you have to kind of gate that, not just like, oh, we'll do this for you, right? Yeah. And also, the conversation with them too was like, your accountant did have all her passwords on her desktop, including your bank password and everything else. So it's not a story. It's here's a risk. You want to understand what the risk looks like. Your accountant thought a stranger was logged into her computer.
Yeah.
And these passwords were on your computer, and the risk is data breach, right? I mean, I think what's really important is not telling a client, you will have a password manager and your password manager will allow you to share password with groups. It's, you will have a tool that encourages good hygiene so you don't get breached.
Right. And I think that's the real meat and potatoes behind, having that conversation, is exposing the amount of risks that they're putting themselves in, and I think that's a double-edged sword, right? It's like, look, just in the same vein of you understanding the risks that you have, and they're like, well, you protect us from that. I said, you're right. The problem is that as a business, I can't inherit your risk by your lack of willingness to implement the right protocols and controls in your organization, right? So like, I'm here to be in business, not to inherit the risk that you don't want, right? And that's where I think the interesting conversation has to be had with customers that are trying to pivot to trying to offload that risk to us, because we do inherit it by touching it, right? And we do have a part to play in that, shared responsibility matrix, but we also have to push back and show them what their responsibility is to actually move the needle forward. And I like where you're going with it, because I think you do an exquisite job. You've been super successful at it, and I think that, for everyone joining here today is going to find a lot of value in what you're saying, because I think these conversations are the ones that are being had right now. maybe some of us just don't know. Like at some point, you just have to pull the trigger and say, "Look, this is what we got." And how I'm curious, how long do you let the waiver ride, Josh? Is that something you're still doing, or you popped smoke on that thing and it's gone, and no more waivers, or are you
Well,
guys still doing it for
we
legacy?
haven't had to show them to very many people. There's really only a few legacy clients, right? I mean, almost aren't, because that's the thing. Like we got rid of WebRoot a long time ago, and everyone has Huntress on their computer as an
Right.
example, right? Like that's our AV. And I mean, Huntress did something amazing. Their pricing lets you kind of throw a 24/7 MDR tool on people's computers almost for what you were paying for, Trend Micro or whatever you had before. So part of what we did is just like our stack is going to be minimally set up to like basically take care of us, right? Like I can't have WebRoot on computers in 2023.
Yeah, we've had that
So
conversation.
yeah, so I mean, yeah, there's a few customers that don't have. I mean, I think another one, like, I mean, to me, it's basically SAT, an email filter, and an MDR of some type. Like you just need those to do business, and when it's okay, if it's SentinelOne managed and it's, your partner cost is $10 an endpoint or $7 an endpoint or something, that's rough. But if you're looking at the price of an email filter and HacWare, Huntress or something like that, like just throw that on there. Even if you have to raise your prices, $12 a user or $8, just whatever, just do it.
Yeah, no, I love it.
So the waiver to us, yes, if you have a very specific risk, I'm going to show that to you. And it's not time bound, but just like this incident happened with this company. And I just said, reminder, like, here's what we sent you last year. Right. Yeah. And also your waiver has to tell a story. Like if you're a member of the tech tribe, they have a really good waiver that speaks to risk, not sort of features. And, it ends by saying, look, like, yes, we understand this is something that costs money, but we're doing this because we care.
Right.
Care about your business. Like we don't want to see you go through a catastrophe. And so even when, I know I keep saying the same thing about stories, but if people see you as just a salesperson, they might not buy something they need just because, they're always trying to sell us stuff.
Yeah, no, and I agree. You got to appeal to the human component of that, and you got to stay away from being the salesperson for sure. And we're nearing the end here, Josh. And I know that if anyone's got some questions, feel free to pop them in. Josh is an amazing resource, and we love having him as a partner. But so if you have any, throw them over in the chat. One question I have for you, Josh, is obviously we all have learned a lot of things. I have an initiative called Live, Learn, Give. And I want to tie that up at the very end here as we start to answer some of the questions that may be coming in. What do you wish you would have known before you started selling cybersecurity, bud?
I wish I would have understood the human impact better at the beginning. Because I think going back to something I just said, I think it was easy to get caught up in sort of the stress of it all, sort of how much it costs, how to package it, how to price it, and not just understand that at the end of the day, what we're doing is sort of keeping people safe and sort of helping people in their personal lives, helping people sort of keep their businesses open. And I think having that understanding of the human element earlier would have made this whole thing much easier to sort of get off the ground.
I love that, man.
I guess the other thing too is what I eventually learned, which is that there's no IT without security. Mm-hmm. Like in my presentations, I'll start with that. I'll say, look, I started as just a pure sort of like productivity automation guy, and I had no clue that this was actually a thing. And sort of how interrelated all of this was.
Starting off with best practice, my man. I say the last step in an incident is educating the end user. And if we turn that upside down and we start with educating the end user, the likelihood of you having to ever get to that last step is highly unlikely, because you always do the right thing first, which was the first thing last, right? Yeah. So Diana has got a good comment here. She said that the chat's disabled, so throw it over in the Q&A area. And she says, what do you suggest for individuals that want to learn? Do either of you offer something for individuals or just for businesses?
The only thing, I mean, for individuals, I don't know that I have a great suggestion. I mean, I've done some education, I've done some webinars and some live presentations for some organizations in the community. You know of a good resource for people?
You know, the thing that I did, and I had a whole thing called Netiquette. If you look it up online, there's a whole thing. There's a thing called Netiquette. I used to share that with people as a leave behind to take home for their families to post on their refrigerators. And then we'd give them a cool little sticker with our logo so that they could magnetize it. But Netiquette actually talks about all the rules of the internet, what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. And if we followed a lot of those rules, I think that we'd be living in a much different place. So I used to always, when I did Making IT Simple, I would, parse those off at chamber events and whatnot. So let me see here.
You know what? I do have one more thing. Just a couple weeks ago, CISA and the FBI just put out a sort of personal
the
security best practices PDF. That's really
home
good.
Security best practices. Yeah.
Like how to secure your home network. If you look that up, sort of from CISA and the FBI, they put it out.
There's several other, the National Department of Infrastructure and Security, the NDIS. They also have an MSP shopping guide. And for those that are joining us today, we'll make sure that goes out so you guys can take a look at that as a reference to some of the things that might be available to your customers. But one other question here. Josh, what tips and tricks do you give MSPs, or would you give other MSPs that are trying to get into the cybersecurity space, man? What are some of the things other than stories and, packaging and pricing, making sure you're billing for profit, having a good talk track around, the way you position it? What are some other tips and tricks, bud?
Get to know your vendors personally. Get to know the people sort of who run your vendors. Get to know your account managers. Make sure you're working with vendors who are going to listen to you and respond to you. I mean, I think outside of everything you just said, I think that's the other one. It's just like getting a stack that makes sense, and be really careful to not just buy the stack that was easy for you to buy necessarily. Like you might get an email from Pax8 that they just launched this new thing and you're like, I'm going to buy that one. Or like, like me, I got into cybersecurity, into really selling cybersecurity when I was like very gung-ho ConnectWise partner, Continuum partner. And I just used their stack because that's what they provided. But I mean, they had this feature that would like look for sort of policy violations on computers, like computers that didn't have, like a bad password policy or something. Right. So I'm in this tool. They're like charging us per device for this tool, and it gives you the information. And then I would say, okay, cool. How do I fix it? And they were like, oh, you have to Google that and figure it out and do it. And it's like they rushed something to market and sold it very aggressively to their partners, and it didn't work. It didn't do anything. Like our clients didn't care about their policy, their security posture. And at that point, I was just like little MSP. I didn't have the expertise to fix it. Right. So it was essentially a valueless product, which had been sort of railroaded onto partners. And I think you have to be very careful to vet what's out there and trust yourself. If you're like, this doesn't make sense, don't let your account manager convince you it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree.
Because they're kind of out to get you.
There's other vendors that are out to help you too, though.
Yeah, they want your money. I mean, you got to remember, right? Like, Juan mentioned profit. Like it's cool to buy stuff, but your clients don't care. Like in some ways, this is about you. It has to make sense to you. You have to understand your risk profile. And I guess, I'll leave it at this, right? We started this saying I had a pretty unique group of customers. I don't have the risk profile of HIPAA. I don't have the risk profile of GDPR.
Right.
Right. So I don't need to buy something that my account manager is just trying to sell to people who have GDPR risk.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. And then that's the thing for us over here at HacWare is trying to do the right thing, listening to our partners, making sure that we're part of their success. And for everyone that's here with us, that's part of HacWare, thank you for being a part of it. But that's the biggest thing. That's one of the main reasons that I'm here, right? Because I knew we were doing something different, something special, and something that was going to be meaningful to empower others to be successful, not just internally, but externally with their partners, right? Having that right product, the right service, the right support, the right thing. One of the beauties I love about what we do is actually publish our roadmap. So like Josh, I know you constantly send in feedback of things that you want to see and change. And we look at those things all the time and we're like, okay, those are really good ideas. We probably should put those in and put them on our sprints. So it's really important when you do have a vendor that's interested in making sure that it works for you. And I can't say any more about that. You've said enough, but I definitely feel like that's one of the big strengths that we have. And we're just so happy to be able to do that and give back. But
it's great. I mean, and find vendors that listen to you, be willing to engage with your vendors. And I mean, I chose HacWare too, like find vendors that align with your ethics.
True. Yeah.
Like that's going to be harder necessarily when you're choosing your RMM vendor, but when you're sort of like bringing in like the other pieces of your stack, look for people where you like the owner or you like the leadership.
Yeah. I'm here because of the team. Right. And I said that, and I'm here because of the partners, right? I feel like we can make a big difference together. And that's where I think that, we have a big hill to climb as a community and as a managed service industry. There's a hill for us to climb here, and that's education. And I really appreciate it because you today, Josh, have been wonderful, man. Thanks for giving back to the community. I know that there's so many people here that are going to enjoy this, not only today, but in the future, man. So hats off to you for a spectacular webinar, man. Like you just brought it today. We got to do this again now. Now I feel supercharged. I'm like, coming do this again with you, man. No, I didn't do nothing. I'm just here. But and for the rest of our partners that are joining us either today or in the future, I would love to hear your stories too, because together I think we have an opportunity to grow together, learn together, and then give back. And so if there's no other questions, if anyone else has anything else in the Q&A, Josh, do you have any final thoughts, my friend?
No, I mean, just everyone get out there. Okay, I do have a final thought. Everyone who's listening now or listening to this in the future, believe in yourself to go out and lead live security training. I see a lot of posts online on Reddit, MSP, on Tech Tribe or whatever, like, hey, I need to hire someone to do a training. I mean, certainly you could hire me to do a training if you want, but do it yourself. It's not that hard, right? How could I possibly tell a story? How could I possibly just go out, read the news, like go, read Krebs on security, read Schneider on security, like just if you read a couple of these articles, your news feed will then be full of them, right? Because that's how the scary internet works. But like, just engage in this topic, make this an interesting topic to yourself, and you will be so full of stories, you'll become that guy. Mm-hmm. And like, go out and talk. It's fun.
It is. And that's how we met. It's just by talking.
Blabbing.
Well, Josh, it's been amazing having you today, man. I knew this was going to be a special webinar, and it's near and dear to my heart to see you be super successful. And I really can't wait to see you be more successful. For everyone that joined us today, thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back again for another live, voice of the customer and customer success stories. And we can't wait to see all your success in the near term future. So thanks all of you for joining. We'll see you again soon.